What if I told you there was once a woman who ruled not as queen, but as emperor, and fed her enemies to living nightmares while the court applauded? Her name was Zetian, a concubine who climbed a staircase of secrets to the dragon throne, and turned fear into policy, pain into spectacle, and suspicion into a national language. If you dare to walk the corridor where whispers outlived their owners, hit subscribe now, because before this tale is done, you'll learn what was hidden beneath the stone floor of her darkest room. The corridor breathes with damp and torch smoke. Lacquered doors glint like watchful eyes. Somewhere beyond the silk screens, a bell chimes the hour and a cage rustles. This is Chang'an at its height, lanterns high poetry, sweet empire wide, and yet the palace heart beats to a colder rhythm. In these chambers, rank is a blade and favor a trap. On nights like this, even the wind seems to bow. Power wears perfume, smiles without promise, and writes destinies with an unseen hand. She arrived as a minor ornament in a vast household, a name on a roster of beauty expected to age into silence behind monastery walls. But when Emperor Taizong died, she did not vanish. She returned boldly to the orbit of his son Gaozong. Protocol said no. Desire and design said yes. A glance became a conversation, a confidence, a conspiracy with time itself. In a world drilled to say impossible, she learned to pronounce inevitable. There were 2 stars already in Gaozong's sky, Empress Wang, and the favored consort Xiu, shining with titles and allies. Zetian dimmed them without raising her voice. She perfected the art of proximity, a hand on a pulse, a word in an ear, a document that arrived just when doubt was strongest. In a court where truth traveled slower than rumor, she accelerated rumor into verdict. By the time chains clinked, the verdict sounded like common sense. The palace discovered a new vocabulary, inquiries that never ended, interviews that began with compliments and closed with confessions, records written so neatly that mercy could find no place to sign. Executions had always existed. She reimagined them as messages that walked on their own. Devices multiplied rooms, acquired purposes, and officials learned that a floor can remember footsteps. Pain became a curriculum. Survival an exam with questions that changed while you answered. Fear was useful. Systematized fear was law. Across the capital, bronze boxes opened their mouths to swallow anonymous accusations, and a new breed of officer, cruel officials policed the shadows between words. Lai Junchen rose like a blade from a sheath, fluent in the grammar of terror. Families dined in whispers. Poems lost their metaphors. Doors were shut softly, as if loudness itself were seditious. The city did not sleep, it rehearsed. Where other emperors collected curiosities, she curated consequences. Tigers paced like striped sentences waiting for their periods. Wolves learned to obey more faithfully than courtiers. Even the dogs seemed to understand hierarchy. Processions led the condemned past iron bars so that dread could enter before the body did. The lesson was elegant and terrible. Some verdicts arrive on 4 legs, and the audience is part of the punishment. Paranoia scaled the steps of government. Advisors plotted their own safety instead of policy. Signatures trembled on edicts. Even dreams were interrogated. Zetian did not merely suspect conspiracies, she redesigned the map so that every road could be one. She removed rivals root and branch, then salted the ground with memory, teaching the court that lineage is not a shield, but a silhouette easily erased when the light is moved. The purges cut through salons and study halls alike. Scholars learned that metaphors can be weapons pointed at their authors. A poem's moon might be read as a hidden face. Old houses with proud genealogies discovered that history has a delete key. And yet the bureaucracy grew sharper. The borders held grain, moved roads were mended. Efficiency became its own alibi, and the empire learned to call silence stability. In the middle of this storm, clerks copied neat columns of outcomes, and somewhere in the archives a careful hand noted what worked, who broke, and how long it took for terror to teach obedience. Ambassadors carried home stories they tried not to believe. Musicians tuned their instruments to drown out certain sounds, and beneath one chamber paved, polished, forgetful workers heard hollow places where the floor did not quite ring true. What had been sealed there, and why, if you want more, say okay. Beneath the palace floors, rumor lived like mold in the dark. Some said the hollow chambers were pits where screams once lingered sealed away to keep the corridors respectable. Others whispered that Zetian herself ordered secret rooms built not to hide treasure but to preserve experiments. Spaces where her human swine lived out their final days, their groans absorbed by clay and stone. Servants crossing those tiles claimed to hear breaths that did not belong to the living. Ministers carried themselves like actors in a tragedy whose script changed without notice. Every audience with the Empress was a gamble. A bow could be read as flattery or mockery, a phrase as loyalty or treason. She thrived on ambiguity because ambiguity demanded obedience, and when clarity came, it often arrived in the form of shackles. Behind her throne stood the shadows of beasts in cages, ready to demonstrate that disobedience had 1,000 endings, none of them swift. Yet, perversely, the realm prospered. Roads expanded, taxes were managed, fields fed the cities. Zetian elevated men of talent regardless of class, cutting through ossified aristocracies with the same blade she used on rivals. To her subjects, far from the capital, she was efficient, almost just. But inside the court, her face was a mask that could smile as easily as it could condemn. She embodied a paradox cruelty that nurtured order, mercy that disguised calculation. Gaozong, once her partner, faded into shadow, stricken with illness and clouded mind. Wu ruled in his name, then simply ruled. Her ascent was a staircase of corpses, each step polished with ceremony. No divine voice crowned her. She seized divinity for herself. Temples were renamed sutras, rewritten statues raised that showed her as Buddha incarnate. To worship the Empress was not flattery, it was survival. Faith itself became an instrument of fear. The animals were more than executioners, they were symbols. Tigers for traitors, wolves for conspirators, dogs for disloyal kin. The ritual matched crime to creature, as if nature had agreed to serve the throne. Witnesses recalled the Empress sipping delicately from a porcelain cup while paws tore through flesh. The mingled scents of roasted duck above and raw blood below created a grotesque banquet of contrasts, teaching every guest that refinement and savagery could share the same table. Li Junchen, her dreaded agent, perfected tortures that read like obscene poems, nails split with bamboo throats, dissolved with vinegar joints broken by the donkey-kicking rack. His genius was cruelty, his reward unchecked authority. But Zetian trusted no one. The day came when even Lai, who had delivered thousands into agony, was himself dragged screaming into the abyss he had served. His death was a warning to the others. Instruments of fear are disposable. Families learned to destroy themselves before the state could. Fathers denounced sons to protect the household, wives betrayed husbands for survival. Bronze boxes swallowed accusations until truth itself was irrelevant. The empire became a theater of suspicion, every citizen, both actor and audience. And through it all, Zetian watched, recording, refining, ensuring that terror was not just an accident of her reign, but its architecture. As years passed, paranoia hollowed her. She saw rebellion in glances, curses in cat's eyes, conspiracies in verse. Entire clans vanished, roots and branches, both their estates divided their graves unmarked. The Tang court, once a constellation of families, became a graveyard of names. And still the empire functioned: roads, busy markets, loud temples full. Horror became ordinary, and ordinariness hid horror. That was her triumph and her curse. In age obsession, warped into delusion. Alchemists fed her mercury potions. Her skin dulled, her hair fell, yet she proclaimed herself divine. Young lovers cycled through her chambers, executed once their beauty began to fade. She spoke to empty chairs, claiming to hear the voices of those she had silenced. Ministers began to wait out her commands, knowing forgetfulness would soon erase them. The empire she had ruled with steel now tiptoed around her fragility. When death came, it was not by blade or beast, but by the slow poison she had chosen in search of immortality. Ministers finally dared to remove her, her mind fractured, her body ruined. She died surrounded not by roaring animals or whispering courtiers, but by silence, the silence of a woman who once fed fear to an empire, and in the end became a ghost of her own making. The hollow chambers under the palace floor remained sealed, but the echoes have never stopped. After her death, the court moved swiftly to erase her presence, as if history itself wished to breathe again. Temples that had once borne her name were rededicated statues of her likeness, quietly dismantled sutras rewritten without her titles. Yet the shadow lingered. Courtiers whispered that even in death she still listened, that silence in the palace was not absence but attention. Servants swore they felt her eyes on them when crossing certain halls at night. The tomb she had designed was immense, carved into mountainside stone with entire miniature palaces underground. Ceramic soldiers stood guard, frozen in eternal service, while chambers were stocked with replicas of everything she had claimed in life. But some claimed darker rooms were sealed within vaults that contained records of her tortures, jars of preserved remains, and strange alchemical tools meant to prolong existence. No grave robbers dared enter. Fear of her outlived her breath. For the people of China, her reign remained a paradox. Farmers spoke of improved roads and lowered taxes. Merchants praised stable trade routes. Scholars admitted she had elevated talent above birthright. And yet those close to power told only of dread voices lowered to whispers. Families annihilated, overnight lives measured in confessions extracted by flame or fang. She was both benefactor and butcher, a ruler whose justice tasted of iron and ash. Generations later, stories of the demon Empress passed into folklore. In some villages, mothers frightened children with her name, threatening that Zetian's wolves would come for the disobedient. In others, rebels invoked her memory as proof that women could rule as ruthlessly as men. She became a mirror for fear and ambition alike, her image painted in equal parts awe and horror. Legends stretched further than facts, but the truth was already stranger than legend. Foreign envoys who once attended her gruesome feasts carried stories back to their own lands. In Persia, they told of a woman who boiled men alive while dining. In distant Europe, her name was whispered alongside Caligula and Nero. Yet, even there, her singularity stood out not just as a tyrant, but as a woman who dared to wear the dragon crown and redefine cruelty as statecraft. Her notoriety became international currency. Among scholars, debate persisted: was she a monster born of chance or a product of her age? Some argued her cruelty was no different than her male predecessors. Others insisted she magnified brutality into performance, turning punishment into theater. Whatever the argument, one truth endured: she ruled 15 years as emperor, longer than many celebrated men, and left behind an empire both expanded and traumatized. Her shadow lay across every dynasty that followed. The curse of Consort Xiao haunted her legend. The tale of a dying woman who swore to return as a cat was retold for centuries. Empress Wu's lifelong ban on cats became symbolic proof that even she, mistress of fear, was afraid of something. Children recited rhymes about the cat who waits in the palace, believing the spirit still stalked the Forbidden City's rafters, unseen but eternal. Fear, after all, is the longest legacy. In the annals of history, Wu Zetian's reign was both meticulously documented and deliberately distorted. Later, historians, often men loyal to rival houses, painted her as a demoness, a usurper, an unnatural aberration. Yet, between their venom and her victims' screams lies a strange respect she had accomplished what none thought possible. She had broken through the iron lattice of patriarchy only to wield that power with claws sharper than any man's. To the modern eye, her story is a study in contradictions. She was both visionary reformer and sadistic executioner, both protector of Buddhism and violator of its core compassion, both feminist icon and warning of ambition unchained. Her empire of terror teaches us that progress and horror can share the same mask, and that absolute power does not merely corrupt it, invents new languages of cruelty etched into both stone and memory. And perhaps that is why her tale endures. Because beneath the dragons and silk, beneath the rituals and poems lies a truth that still unsettles us. Monsters are not always born. They are made carefully, deliberately, with tools of law, fear, and faith. Wu Zetian remains proof that history's darkest chapters are written not only by men with swords, but by women with silence, patience, and a gaze that could turn mercy into myth. The ministers who deposed her thought the nightmare would end with her last breath, but they underestimated the endurance of memory. Every whisper of dissent in later courts invoked her ghost. When an official grew too ambitious, colleagues muttered, "Remember Wu Zetian." Her name became shorthand for excess cruelty and the dangerous allure of unchecked authority. Even emperors centuries later felt her presence like a warning etched into the walls of their own palaces. Commoners, however, remembered something different. They recalled that she reduced taxes, opened examinations to men of lower birth, and punished corrupt officials without hesitation. For them, the Empress was a paradox, a tyrant who expanded opportunity, a monster who built roads. In taverns and markets, old men would tell children, she fed people to wolves, but she fed the empire too. The contradiction itself gave her legend its staying power. As for the palace servants, their tales were darker. They spoke of the sound of claws scraping in empty corridors long after the beasts had been slaughtered. They whispered about shadows moving across the walls when no torch was lit. Some swore that at night the gardens smelled of blood instead of flowers, as if the earth itself remembered what had been spilled. Even the bravest guards avoided certain paths after sunset. The scholars of later dynasties debated endlessly should she be recorded as a sovereign or as a cautionary tale. Some revised annals to soften her image, emphasizing her reforms and administrative brilliance. Others doubled down on horror, describing executions in ghastly detail, portraying her as a succubus in human form. What emerged was not a consistent history, but a tapestry of fear and admiration, each thread contradicting the other, yet impossible to untangle. Foreign visitors centuries later marveled at her tomb, the Qianling Mausoleum. Unlike other imperial graves, its heart remains unopened. Legends say she filled it with secrets too dangerous to disturb scrolls of forbidden methods, cursed relics, or perhaps nothing at all, an empty chamber meant to make intruders tremble. Archaeologists still debate what lies sealed in that mountain, but even silence has power when it belongs to someone like Wu Zetian. Folklore embroidered her into China's supernatural fabric. In ghost plays, she appeared as a judge of the underworld, weighing souls not with fairness, but with the same cruelty she used in life. In some stories, she rode a chariot drawn by wolves. In others, she dined eternally, while shadows screamed around her. Whether these tales were condemnation or grudging respect hardly mattered. They ensured she was never forgotten. The cruelty of her methods fascinated later generations, not only because of their brutality, but also because of their precision. She was no mere butcher. She was a designer of pain. By cataloging suffering as if it were science, she turned torture into a discipline. The bronze cauldrons and reverse hangings may have vanished, but the concept of fear as an engineered system left a scar on governance itself. Rulers after her learned her lesson well, and yet amid all this horror, Zetian remains an enigma. Was she truly worse than her male counterparts, or merely remembered more vividly because she was a woman? History judged her through lenses clouded by gender resentment and myth. The truth is, perhaps more terrifying, she was not exceptional in her cruelty, only exceptional in how well she wielded it. Power gave her a canvas, and she painted with shadows. Imagine the court at its peak, lanterns blazing, courtiers bowing poets, reciting verses so carefully crafted they meant nothing at all. Underneath that spectacle lay the unspoken truth. Every smile was rehearsed, every word weighed, every silence dangerous. The palace itself was a stage where the Empress was both playwright and executioner, scripting roles for everyone else while reserving the final act for herself. That act was always death. Today, Zetian's story is retold in novels, dramas, and documentaries, often simplified into caricature: the cruel Empress, the demon queen, the lone woman who dared what men feared. But beneath these portrayals lies a darker reflection, not of her alone, but of humanity. She shows us how power can corrode conscience, how ambition can masquerade as destiny, and how an empire can function smoothly even when its heart beats with terror. Centuries after her reign, the chroniclers still could not agree. Was she a genius who stabilized the empire, or a tyrant who bled it dry? This unresolved tension kept her legend alive, suspended between admiration and dread. Each retelling seemed to shift the balance. Sometimes she appeared as a pioneer, other times as a demon cloaked in silk. It was as if even death could not trap her into a single identity. In the villages, storytellers embroidered her cruelty with supernatural colors. They said thunder rolled louder over her tomb, that storms lingered whenever her name was spoken. Farmers crossing the mountains of Shenling bowed instinctively, afraid that failing to show respect might awaken something buried too shallow. Her reign had ended, but her myth had only begun growing like ivy over every stone her hands once touched. Among the nobility, her memory was more complicated. Families who had survived her purges carried invisible scars, treating politics as a game of silence for generations. Their descendants whispered of vanished cousins of names erased from ancestral rolls. Zetian's shadow fell across their family altars, a reminder that lineage itself could be both weapon and target. They prayed not only for protection but for obscurity, hoping never again to attract the gaze of power. Scholars in later courts dissected her reign as if it were a medical specimen. They noted how she used terror as medicine to cut away rivals, how she strengthened the bureaucracy by breaking its bones. They described her as both surgeon and disease. And in those writings another truth emerged. Zetian was not a monster outside the system. She was the system, perfected its contradictions, carried to their logical, horrifying extreme. Yet, despite centuries of condemnation, her rule fascinated women of ambition. Some saw in her not cruelty but courage, the audacity to seize what men said could not be seized. Even as historians painted her as wicked ballads, whispered that she had proven women could rule. This duality made her legend resilient. She was both weapon and warning, inspiration and indictment, depending on who told the tale. The palace itself became haunted ground in collective memory. visitors claimed to hear distant roars in empty courtyards, though the beasts were long dead. Others said they saw a woman in imperial robes drifting across moonlit gardens, her face obscured, her footsteps silent. Whether ghost or echo, these visions testified to a reign that had blurred the line between human history and folklore. Zetian had become more than Empress, she was a specter. Modern historians, sifting through chronicles, find evidence of efficiency reforms and cultural patronage. Yet, every discovery of her administrative brilliance comes paired with accounts of blood and fire. The contrast makes her story irresistible, a mirror for power itself. Can greatness ever be separated from cruelty when built on bones? Zetian forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that horror and progress are not opposites but siblings. The sealed tomb at Qianling remains her final enigma. Unlike other imperial graves, it resists excavation. Legends insist that inside rests a chamber lined with mirrors so that any intruder would first face themselves. Others believe the beasts she once commanded were entombed with her, their spirits waiting restless. The mountain stands silent, yet its silence is louder than excavation. It keeps the mystery intact, feeding curiosity as surely as fear. In the end, Zetian's story is not just Chinese history, it is a parable of power. Absolute rule, unchecked ambition, and terror as governance are not relics of the Tang court, they are recurring patterns across ages and continents. Her life warns us that when systems reward fear over truth, even brilliance can rot into brutality. The empire she ruled still shines in poetry and art, but in its shadows, her figure remains etched in crimson. So, when we speak of Zetian, we do not only remember an empress, we remember the machinery of fear she perfected, the whispers she weaponized, and the silence she left behind. Her legend endures because it terrifies and fascinates in equal measure. And perhaps that is her truest immortality, not the mercury pills, not the statues, not the crown, but the fact that centuries later we still shiver when we tell her story. The twilight of Zetian's reign unfolded like a theater of decay. Once sharp in judgment, she now drifted between lucidity and delirium, mistaking courtiers for ghosts and treating empty chairs as her counsel. Ministers grew adept at bowing to nothing, nodding solemnly at words meant for the dead. To outsiders, the empire seemed stable. Inside, the palace groaned like a house whose beams had been eaten by termites. Her mercury potions quickened her ruin. Spots bloomed on her skin, her hands trembled, her tongue thickened. Still, she insisted these were divine signs, proof of transformation into a living Buddha. Physicians scribbled false reassurances while watching the Empress dissolve. Every convulsion was explained away as a sacred vision, every seizure reframed as a prophecy. The line between holiness and horror blurred until even witnesses forgot which was which. Courtiers plotted her downfall in whispers, terrified that a misplaced word might summon execution, but aware that delay meant ruin. They chose their moment not out of courage, but necessity. The Empress had become unpredictable, issuing contradictory orders, demanding impossible rituals, punishing shadows. When they finally moved against her in 705, they found no resistance, only a woman broken by the poisons she trusted sitting on a throne that seemed too large for her shrunken frame. Her removal was bloodless, anticlimactic. The woman who had orchestrated thousands of deaths was quietly escorted from power, her voice too weak to curse, her gaze unfocused. Days later, she died the immortality she had craved denied by the very elixirs that promised it. In that bitter irony, history found its cruel symmetry. She who fed others poison now lay defeated by poison herself. Yet, even stripped of life, Zetian's influence persisted. Ministers who had ousted her found themselves imitating her systems, the bureaucracy, She strengthened the surveillance methods she pioneered, the ruthlessness she normalized. Her tools outlived her, adopted by successors who denounced her even as they borrowed her machinery of control. In trying to erase her, they perpetuated her. Over centuries, playwrights reshaped her image. On stage, she became a warning, cloaked in brocade, her cruelty exaggerated into legend, her ambition dramatized as a morality tale. Audiences gasped not only at her acts, but at the suggestion that such acts were possible, even celebrated in the halls of power. Through theater, she was immortalized not as a woman, but as a caution the mask of civilization can always slip. Foreign chroniclers encountering her legend compared her to the worst of Rome's tyrants. Yet they acknowledged something different: Zetian was effective. Unlike rulers who burned their empires to ash, she preserved hers, even expanded it. Her horror was sustainable, her reign long. This made her all the more chilling. She proved that terror need not collapse a system. It can reinforce it, make it efficient, even admired from afar. Her ban on cats remained one of the strangest details in her story. For centuries, Chinese households whispered that cats carried curses, their presence an echo of Zetian's phobia. In that superstition lay a deeper truth: even the most powerful are ruled by fear, and sometimes their private terrors shape an entire culture. A dying consort's curse had altered palace policy, and through it, folklore itself. As dynasties rose and fell, her story was never forgotten. Rebels cited her as proof that power could be seized against all odds. Conservatives cited her as proof that such seizures led to corruption and blood. She became an argument in every political debate, a ghost in every hall where power shifted. In this way, Zetian continued to rule long after her bones had turned to dust. Today, historians sift through her legacy with tools she could never have imagined: archaeology, genetics, comparative analysis. They confirm some horrors, doubt others, but always circle back to the same conclusion: Zetian was real, and her reign defies simple categories. Tyrant or trailblazer, monster or monarch, she embodies the oldest warning in human history: when ambition marries power, cruelty is never far behind. In the silence of Chenling Mausoleum where she lies, entombed, legends say the earth itself remembers. Travelers claim that winds howl differently across the mountain, as though carrying voices too faint to understand. Some insist that the sealed chambers guard more than bones, that within rest scrolls cataloging tortures in her own hand, or jars of ashes belonging to enemies she annihilated. The tomb's unopened gates leave imagination free to wander, and in that ambiguity her reign continues to live. Centuries later, poets invoked her name cautiously, using metaphors instead of direct reference. A line about a lotus rooted in blood was understood to be Zetian. A phoenix who ate its own chicks meant the Empress. In this way, she became a code, a riddle within literature, proof that fear can outlast armies. To speak of her openly was once deadly. To speak of her obliquely became an art. For feminists in modern times, Zetian represents both triumph and terror. She shattered a ceiling higher than any palace roof, proving that women could rule absolutely in a world built to deny them. Yet, she also stands as the embodiment of how that rule was purchased with cruelty so severe that admiration curdles into unease. To claim her as symbol is to embrace paradox, empowerment entwined with atrocity. The animals of her menagerie live on in cultural nightmares. Chinese folklore still recalls wolves trained to obey only her dogs, conditioned to devour slowly, tigers treated as executioners. Children, hearing these tales, shiver at the idea of beasts as instruments of law. In truth, the animals are long gone, but their ghostly echoes persist. To imagine them is to glimpse how human ingenuity can twist even nature into cruelty. In academic circles, her reign is often dissected as a case study of power's corrosive logic. She began as a concubine with limited choices, learned survival through cunning, then discovered that fear was the most reliable tool of governance. Each decision to secure her throne made the next cruelty easier. By the time she crowned herself, Emperor cruelty had become habit, a reflex, almost a necessity. History rarely shows so clearly how ambition hardens into monstrosity, yet alongside this horror lies undeniable effectiveness. She expanded the empire's borders, elevated talented officials, and ensured prosperity for the majority. Her genius was to prove that brutality and efficiency could coexist, that terror could stabilize rather than destabilize. That lesson, grim as it is, remains relevant wherever leaders justify cruelty in the name of order. Zetian was not an aberration, but a precedent. Visitors to her tomb today find only silence, moss, and stone, yet even there guides lower their voices when telling her story. The fear may be irrational, but it is real. Generations have fed it, layering superstition upon history until the two are indistinguishable. To stand before her burial mound is to feel the weight of centuries pressing down, a reminder that some rulers never truly die. The question lingers, was Zetian victim of her age or architect of her darkness? Patriarchal historians condemned her more harshly because she was a woman, but the blood on her hands is not invented. Perhaps she was both sculpted by circumstance, yet also a sculptor who carved cruelty into the very foundation of her reign. Like all tyrants, she is both product and producer of horror. What remains most disturbing is not what she did, but how well it worked. She demonstrated that fear could be engineered, systematized, and sustained for decades without collapsing society. She showed that progress could be built on terror, that prosperity could coexist with atrocity. It is this contradiction more than the gore that makes her legacy endure, the realization that horror can wear the mask of stability. And so Zetian's story ends where it began, in the uneasy marriage of awe and dread. She was a woman who seized what none believed possible, then twisted it into a theater of cruelty that echoes through centuries. Her tomb remains closed, her secrets intact, but her lesson open that absolute power reshapes the human soul, and that the line between ruler and monster is far thinner than we dare admit. Her empire is gone, but her shadow remains waiting in the silence beneath stone floors.